The morning after the wedding, the golden sunlight poured down on Beverly Valley as if everything were peaceful, but that tranquility was only a mask for the storm that was rising in the hearts of those who once called each other family. Hope Logan had just become Liam Spencer's wife again, the ring still shining on her hand, but her eyes could not hide the worry that was gnawing at her. On the upper floor of Forrester Creations, Steffi Forrester Finnegan stood alone by the window, looking down at the city below like a queen recalculating her power chessboard. Something was simmering inside her. Not jealousy, but a strong belief that Hope did not deserve to be called Beth Spencer's mother, the child Steffi had held, loved, and lost in the cruelest moment. To Steffi, motherhood was not a title, but a bond of flesh and blood, and she believed Beth belonged to her, not Hope. The nightmare began with a seemingly harmless family meeting. Steffi suddenly announced that she would take custody of Beth, her voice as cold as a sentence. The room was so quiet that Hope's heart could be heard beating rapidly, not with fear, but with seething rebellion. Hope stood tall, her eyes blazing, saying that she would not let anyone take her child from her again. Liam stood between two women, one his current wife, the other his unbreakable past, and in that moment, he knew that all his happiness was on the line. The custody battle for Beth was more than a legal matter. It was a battleground of love, guilt, and honor. Since Steffi lost Phoebe, the child she once believed was her own, but was really Beth, the pain had never gone away. She had forgiven, tried to start over, acted calm when she saw Hope and Liam raising Beth, but every smile was just a thin shell to hide the emptiness. When she saw Hope in her wedding dress, holding Beth in her arms as a testament to perfect happiness, something inside Steffi broke. She believed that if she couldn't get justice for herself, she would at least get back the child that once belonged to her. Hope knew Steffi wasn't joking. In her eyes was the determination of someone who had lost everything. But she was no longer the weak woman of years ago, who had begged for Liam's love and accepted injustice. Hope was now a mother, the one who protected Beth from all old wounds, even if the one who caused those wounds was of the same Forrester bloodline. The court date was set, the media surrounded her, sensational articles were everywhere. Forrester sues Logan for custody of Spencer. In the courtroom, the cold fluorescent lights reflected the faces of the two mothers sitting opposite each other. Steffi wore a black dress, as if it were a funeral for the sisterhood they had once tried to build. Hope wore a white dress, as if trying to cling to the last ray of light of trust. Between them stands Liam, the man around whom all judgment revolves. He is no longer a hero, but a living witness to both their mistakes. Steffi brought witnesses, photos, and old recordings, proof that Beth had lived with her, called her mom. She said that Hope couldn't understand the motherly love of someone who had held her in her early days, that she was the only one who could give Beth a truly stable home. Hope responded with foster care documents, with love, with every moment she spent awake by Beth's bed, with the tears of a mother who had never felt secure. The battle wasn't just on paper. Outside the courtroom, public opinion was divided into two camps, the Logans and the Forresters, families that had been at odds for generations, now bringing the fight to the very blood of their children. Thousands of comments erupted on social media, with photos of Beth dragged in as symbols of the struggle. But in the midst of the chaos, only two people understood what was happening best. This wasn't about justice, it was about who could endure more. Steffi became more and more haunted, more and more consumed by the old loss. At night, she looked at old photos of Beth as Phoebe, her hands trembling as she touched the blurry image. She began to hear the baby crying in her head, the call for Mom, echoing from deep within her mind. Finn tried to stop her, but he couldn't touch her disintegrating mind. Hope's every word in court was like a knife twisting into an old wound, making Steffi unable to distinguish between justice and revenge. Hope was no better. She couldn't sleep, she was tired, and the fear that history would repeat itself hardened her to the point of coldness. She began to doubt everyone, even Liam. Every time he looked at Steffi, she saw regret in him, a soft corner that she couldn't erase. She was afraid that this trial would not only take away her child, but also her husband's heart. And in the long, lonely night, Hope wondered if Liam would be strong enough to resist Steffi's mesmerizing gaze if she really decided to use it as a weapon. When the final day of the trial arrived, the two entered the courthouse like two warriors. The media jostled, flashbulbs flashed, curious eyes followed every move. Inside, the air was thick and stifling. Steffi presented her final accusations, saying that Hope had taken advantage of her kindness in the past, that she had been deceived, that Beth was living in the shadow of a lie. Hope stood up, her hand tightening on the necklace Beth had given her. She spoke not with logic, but with emotion. She told of Beth's sick nights, of her daughter's dreams of her mother disappearing, of that innocent look in her eyes when she said, "Don't go anywhere." The courtroom was silent, and when the judge announced a recess for consideration, no one said a word. Liam sat in the middle, his hands covering his face, knowing that whatever the outcome would destroy a part of their souls. Steffi didn't come home that night. She drove to the Malibu beach, where she had lived with Liam and Beth. The cold wind whipped her hair, the waves crashed against the shore, and she felt like she was standing between two worlds, the one where she had been a mother, and the one where she had been stripped of that title. In a moment of weakness, she remembered the way Liam had looked at her, the way he had touched her cheek, and in her mind, twisted by despair, Steffi thought that maybe just one more time, just making Liam remember that feeling, she could get it all back. Hope, meanwhile, stood by Beth's bed, watching her sleep. The darkness outside the window cast a melancholy look on her face. She knew Steffi wouldn't stop. She sensed something coming, a wave darker than the trial. And in her heart a terrible question rang out, not whether she could save her daughter, but whether she was strong enough to save herself when the woman she once considered a sister was turning into someone who could destroy her family. In the deep night, under the cold silver moonlight, Steffi stepped out of the car, her bare feet stepping on the wet sand. She closed her eyes, listening to the sound of the waves, and in the breath of the night sea, she heard a child calling for her mother. A call vague, distant, but so real that it brought tears to her eyes. Somewhere in the darkness, a faint light flashed. Was it the eyes of the child the two women were fighting over, or the illusion of a heart torn in two, never to be mended? Los Angeles was unusually overcast that morning, heavy gray clouds pressing down on the city as if to smother any remaining light of dawn. In the small house on the hill, Hope Logan stood silently at the window, looking down at the winding road leading to the international airport. Beside her, her suitcase was packed, her passport stacked neatly on the table, and her ticket to Paris gleamed silver. She didn't turn when Liam Spencer entered, just closed her eyes, swallowing the last silence of their lives here. Beth Spencer, their young daughter, was sitting in the middle of the living room, drawing pink and yellow circles on a piece of paper, a picture of the three of them holding hands under a sunny sky. No one spoke. The argument with Steffi Forrester the night before still echoed in their heads, like an aftershock. The harsh words, the tears, the slamming doors, all of it had created a rift so deep it could never be mended. Hope had said she couldn't take it anymore, that she didn't want Beth to grow up in a city where every memory was stained with hate and possession. Liam had agreed, not because he wanted to leave, but because he knew Hope was too broken to stay. This trip to Europe wasn't a vacation, it was an escape. Steffi woke later than usual, dizzy from the night before's alcohol. She could still hear Hope saying she was taking Beth, that Steffi had no right to interfere. She'd said words that scare her to think back on. In her anger, she'd said that if Hope wanted to disappear, then go away, and she'd raise the rest of Beth's memories her way. But when she woke up, in an empty house, silence washed over her like a cold wave. She called Liam, no answer. She called Hope, the phone was dead. She felt her heartbeat begin to erratic, a premonition that something was about to happen, something irreversible. The plane took off at 10 a.m., gliding through the hazy California sky. In first class, Hope sat close to the window, her hand clasped Liam's. Beth leaned her head on her father's shoulder, her eyes tired but still smiling. They had no idea that in just a few minutes, the peaceful dream they were searching for would turn into a roar of fire and steel. In the control center, the signal of flight code LXA 37 began to flicker. A small warning appeared, then disappeared. A cold storm swept in from the north, sudden gusts of wind causing the plane to shake violently. The pilot tried to maintain altitude, but the system reacted slowly. The pressure gauge jumped wildly. In the last moment, Hope looked up at the sky that had suddenly turned black, feeling like the world was falling. She pulled Beth into her arms, listening to Liam scream, but all the noise was drowned out by the deafening explosion. In Los Angeles, Steffi sat in front of the TV, a cup of coffee cold on the table, her gaze blank. The news suddenly turned red. The anchor's shaky voice announced that a private plane from Los Angeles to Paris had lost contact over the Atlantic. LXA 37 flashed across the screen. The cup of coffee fell to the floor and shattered. Everything inside Steffi froze. She stood up, her fingers shaking as she dialed Liam's number. Then Hope, then Deacon, then Brooke, all silence. No one answered. Hours later, the news was confirmed. The plane had crashed into the cold sea west of Ireland. No survivors found. The news spread like wildfire. Brooke collapsed. Deacon was silent. Ridge held Steffi, who was so distraught she couldn't breathe. She screamed, cried, beat her chest, repeated the words, "I don't want them to go," like a meaningless prayer. But prayers could not bring the dead back. In the days that followed, Los Angeles was shrouded in mourning. The Forrester mansion was closed, the lights were turned off early. Forrester Creations was closed for a week. The press camped around Brooke's house, taking blurry photos of the mother who had lost her child. In her room, Steffi did not eat, did not sleep, just sat looking at the photo of Hope, Liam, and Beth at the wedding. The photo had once made her angry, but now it was the only thing that kept her in the world. She remembered every moment, the final argument, Hope's tearful eyes, the cold words she had thrown like a weapon. Every memory became an unbearable burden. 3 weeks later, part of the fuselage was pulled from the seabed. Among the mangled wreckage was a scorched, salt-stained teddy bear, Beth's toy. Steffi saw it on television, and her heart broke. She collapsed, clutching her head, and for the first time in years, she begged God for forgiveness. Not for hurting Hope, but for letting her hatred lead them to their deaths. Ridge tried to get her to get medical help, but nothing comforted her. She couldn't shake the image of Hope holding her baby on the plane, couldn't erase Beth's laughter from her head. Sometimes she woke in the middle of the night, thinking she heard a soft knock on the door, the sound of small footsteps running down the hallway, a whisper, "Mommy, Steffi, it's me." Every time she did, she turned on the light and rushed out, but only the wind blew through the empty hallway. A month later, Steffi arrived at the cemetery, where 3 new headstones had been erected side by side, Hope Logan Spencer, Liam Spencer, Beth Spencer. She knelt down, her hands trembling against the cold stone, the rain mixed with her tears. There was no one around her, no enemies, no more battles to win or lose. There was only an abyss of emptiness. She whispered, not in words but in her soul, that she wished she could turn back time, hold Hope, say that she didn't want to take Beth, that she was afraid of losing the feeling of being a mother. But time never returned. From then on, Steffi lived like a shadow. Forrester Creations lost its luster. The hope for the future product line was closed forever. Steffi stopped wearing makeup, stopped wearing glamorous clothes, only wore black, and went to the beach every day, where the waves rolled and dissolved like the last breath of the dead. At one point, she thought about ending it all, going with them, but when she saw Finn and the children's faces, she stopped. She understood that the greatest punishment was to live, to remember, to endure what she had done. Years later, people said that every dawn in Malibu, when the sun rose above the sea, a brown-haired woman would be seen sitting on the sand, holding an old teddy bear, her eyes looking far out to sea. She didn't speak, didn't cry, just looked as if waiting for something that couldn't happen. Some fishermen said they had heard children's laughter in the mist, a small, clear voice calling, "Mommy Steffi," and then fading away. Maybe it was just an illusion of the wind, or maybe it was the echoes of restless souls. And somewhere in the sky above Europe, where the plane crashed, people still saw faint spots of light drifting by every night, like 3 small stars still holding hands, sparkling in the endless night. Perhaps Hope, Liam, and Beth have found the peace they have always longed for. As for Steffi, left alone in the world, only one final question echoes in her heart. Is it hatred that makes people lose everything, even the reason to exist?